Good morning, everyone. I'm interested in what's going on across the board with regards to these protests, so-called protests, in the United States, the riots that are happening in Minnesota, Philadelphia, Los Angeles, and a bunch of other cities. We're also seeing protests in Ontario, and what I wanted to look at was we're seeing fines for people out in parks or for using or lingering too long on a park bench. And yet we're seeing whole big mass groups of protesters screaming at police for seemingly for protesting the same things that are sparking the riots in the southern states. But first I wanted to show you guys that at the beginning of May, Georgia, the state Georgia, opened up, and they were being widely criticized. They were saying, the experts, the talking heads, the models were all saying there's going to be a big second wave, there's going to be a resurgence, you can't possibly do this, blah, 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 blah. And so here is his name is Turgay Iyer, a health systems engineer professor at Georgia Tech, and this is his quote here. This is the video, and I'll let him say what he wants to say. Hold on, here we go.
We are expecting this spike to come in about 2 to 3 months after the restrictions are lifted.
Turgay Iyer.
So there you go, Turgay Iyer. But here is on May 25th, today's the 31st of May, CTV News is reporting Ontario reveals potential cause for concerning spike in COVID-19 cases. Okay, the Ontario government has revealed a potential cause for a concerning uptick in the number of new COVID-19 cases in the province and says it will take action if the trend continues. Health Minister Christine Elliott said the recent spike in cases relates back to Mother's Day weekend when people were seeing families when they should not have been more than 5 people together. Here's Mother's Day weekend is Sunday, May 10th. May 25th is 15 days from May 10th. So they're saying that almost 2 weeks to the day, we're seeing this spike. So how is it that they're expecting a second wave in 2 to 3 months? Why would the virus go dormant for 2 or 3 months and then spike? If they opened in May, like we saw this spike right away, right? They're saying, oh, it was Mother's Day weekend. So 2 to 3 months, it just seems it adds less credibility to the models being used. These are the models that they're talking about here. And I want to underscore that there are people who are saying that this is a huge deal, like minor changes in behavior will result in this visible uptick. And then another expert who's citing models from Georgia Tech University, I don't know if they're as well respected as like MIT or whatever, but university is a university, and university studies are used to justify laws and policy making all the time. So concerning, right? When these guys are saying their model says 2 to 3 months later. Back to this one. Back to the initial CTV article. In March, the Ontario government made gatherings of more than 5 people, with the exception of those who live together, illegal. That order remains in place. As far as I know, that order remains in place. This was May 25th. Today it's the 31st. Have they repealed the 5-person thing in the last few days? Right? And this is on the 15th of May, so 3 weeks after opening, Georgia business owners chart their own course forward. This isn't an article about a second wave, a resurgence, or anything like that. They're talking about how their businesses are doing, right? Like it's we're serving customers on patios and for their comfort and confidence and stuff. It's not about the awful second wave that's rolling out. It's not about blaming the repealing of the lockdown measures as the source for the reason that all these people are now in ICU. That's not happening. That's not the news. The news is the business is returning, right? Notable. Okay, CBC is saying, and this is May 2nd, got a COVID-related ticket? Here's why some lawyers say you might want to fight it. Okay, did you linger too long on a park bench? Use a chin-up bar in a public park, or run your dog off leash and now have a hefty ticket for breaking physical distancing rules? Some lawyers say you shouldn't be in a rush to pay it and may instead want to test that fine in court. Municipalities across Ontario, Quebec, and Nova Scotia are handing out large fines for violations of lockdown measures, but some legal experts are raising concerns about lack of clear rules around what's not allowed, the broad discretion given to police and bylaw officers to interpret those rules, and the lack of dispute mechanisms since courts handling provincial offenses are closed. I scroll down a little bit. Quote, at minimum, I think what they need to do is possibly attach something to the ticket stub that makes that clear. I think that even verbally officers should be telling people that there's nothing they need to do with this ticket until the state of emergency has been lifted. Document your experience. Neha Chung, a lawyer in Cornwall, Ontario, has been watching the enforcement actions closely. Her law firm is offering pro bono legal help to local residents who have received lockdown-related tickets. Her advice to people who have been ticketed: document your experience and wait to pay the fine because it's not yet clear how these tickets will be disputed. Okay, so I'm using this to illustrate fines are serious, they're hefty, they're costly, very expensive for people who've been without work if they've been without work, and there's no way to dispute them. In the legal system, you have to have a way to present like your side of the story. You have to be able to defend yourself if you're accused of doing something illegal, right? And fines and like even a speeding ticket, you can dispute that in court, right? So having no way to dispute that, and the article points out that all of the bylaw in Ontario and all those courts are closed. So there's no way to effectively do that. All of that is put on hold until the emergency orders are lifted and things proceed as normal. So perhaps these bylaws won't stand up, right? Perhaps they'll get thrown out. But I wanted to talk about the ability of the police officers and bylaw officers to not give fines, because like here's 23 seconds of the protest yesterday. This is Brad Johnson. I don't know who Brad is. He had a milk mustache there. He's just a Twitter guy, but he's got this. This is post-millennial video footage. He says, "Remember a few days ago in Canada when police were arresting or handing out outrageous fines to people for sitting alone in the park?" And here's 23 seconds of the protest from yesterday. Here is a few more, 20 more seconds. This girl or woman, I think she's a woman anyway, has a hood up. But just when people behave like this, they're just parroting the talking points they've been fed, right? Like I don't know. It's so. Anyway, here we go.
Please, I'm begging you. Stop killing us! Just stop killing us! Why do you have to fucking kill us? Why do you have to kill us? Shoot him in the fucking leg! Do you really have to fucking shoot? Why do you have to fucking kill him?
It's almost a performance, right? Like she's performing for the people over here to like show how strong she believes the reason they're there. But remember, like, well, here's the thousands rally in Toronto against anti-black, anti-Indigenous racism. And so this is being not allowed. This explains what the incident was. And the incident was Toronto police were called to a high-rise apartment, and then I guess either they were out on the balcony or they weren't out on the balcony. The SIU is investigating, but the tenants allege that they were out on the balcony and then the girl fell to her death. And they're alleging that the police either pushed her or helped her fall to her death or something to that effect. I don't know what's true. I have no idea. There was a big deal. They were saying that the police said it was a suicide and for the news not to come, and people were upset, and there was a whole big Twitter thing, and that's what sparked this one off. Similar timing to what happened in the United States with the police officer killing the what was his name? I can't remember the name at this point in time. But the whole thing that sparked the riots in Minnesota, right? Like that's all of that is stacking up at the same time, and somehow these gatherings are okay. And I'm not trying to get into the right or wrong of this particular protest. I'm trying to point out it's uncanny, the timing of this. It's uncanny. Justin Trudeau and Jagmeet Singh made comments on this a few days ago, and all of the things that are happening. And I mean, like, yes, they're commenting in response to what's happening in Minnesota, or what was happening in Minnesota, but all the cascading of this, and then to ignore the public health implications, just again, it's further proof that, like, is this real, or like, you know, what's the danger if this can happen, right? If these things can happen and they're not endangering themselves. In this article, this is May 2nd as well, Doug Ford talks about how the protesters are endangering themselves and He, wishes they wouldn't do that. I'm going to go through it, but I think that, that's not the main story in this article. Hold on. Here's the positioning on this story. The CBC Thousands Rally in Toronto against anti-Black and anti-Indigenous racism. So this was May 30th, this was posted. And it says, thousands of people took part in a rally on downtown Toronto streets on Saturday in protest of what organizers describe as anti-Black and anti-Indigenous racism around the world. It's important for me to be here because if I'm not here, then who else is? Sori Sani, 17, told CBC Toronto at the rally. All lives will not matter until Black ones do. All lives, okay. The peaceful rally, organized by a group dubbed Not Another Black Life, comes on the heels of high-profile police-involved deaths both in Canada and the United States. Some of the ensuing protests in the United States turned violent. So they're saying the Canadian one has not turned violent, it's just been peaceful, but they go out of their way. Like, that's in the very beginning of this article, right? And they talk about how it's important to be here because if I'm not here, who else is? And all lives will not matter until Black ones do. So, like, where's the virus in context to this? Now, to contrast that, here's the May 2nd article talking about anti-lockdown protests irking the premier by turning the flag upside down. This article is a lot about turning the flag upside down, but I'm going to stay focused on the health aspect of it, right? These people are putting themselves at risk. These people are brave people who need to be there because if they're not there, then who else is? Right? Weird. I'm gonna get a mug that just says, "Isn't that weird?" And I'm gonna dedicate it to MK. Okay, anti-lockdown protesters irk Premier by turning Canadian flag upside down. Anti-lockdown protesters drew the ire of Ontario Premier Doug Ford on Saturday when they turned a Canadian flag upside down during their demonstration. Protesters gathered on the Ontario legislative grounds to demand that the provincial government lift restrictions in place to slow the spread of COVID-19. At its peak, there was an estimated 300 people. Quote, "Open the economy now," Doug read one sign at the protest. "All health is essential," read another. Yes, all health is essential. Sure. Yay. I scroll down. Okay, so this is the part. The whole middle part here is about the flag being flown upside down, and this is Doug Ford getting really burned up about it. Okay. Ford acknowledged that the restrictions imposed on the province through the emergency orders are challenging, but added that gatherings in a group and refusing to keep 2 meters apart endangers the protesters themselves. Quote, "I understand people are hurting out there and people want to get back to work, and there's a lot of people hurting, and I can appreciate it," Ford said. "But what they're doing is putting their lives in jeopardy, as far as I'm concerned, with congregating side by side. So I get it. I'm not against any protests. We live in a free society." Right? I mean, that's pretty close, right? What about these guys? Are these guys social distancing? No comment on that in any of the articles. Brave people who, if they're not there, then who else is? Right? I mean, like, it lends credence to the idea that maybe they're just making it up. Right? Social distancing, mask wearing, flatten the curve, stay in your houses, stay afraid. Like, shut down the government for 4 months. For 4 months? They can't do anything until September? 4 sittings for the summer? For billions, hundreds of billions of dollars in spending? Nobody's upset about this? Nobody? Like, wild. NDP, just fine? Everybody's cool with this? Wild. Absolutely wild. You think you're doing a good job, Liberals? Come on. CTV News, and this is moving on. I think I made my point with this, right? Like, okay. CTV News, Decloux reminds cabinet colleagues to be transparent even in times of crisis. I dislike the fact that they're using this so much to say, "Oh, well, we can't do the job." And if the people are doing such a diminished job through their working from home, then maybe they should be paid on a sliding scale, right? To free up. I mean, like, we're talking hundreds of billions of dollars. We've had people laid off in Guelph because tax dollars are finite. And the city of Guelph can't just raise taxes to cover off this expense, and they can't go into debt. So Guelph is needing to lay people off, and this happened a month ago, right? Like, but we've got government workers who are working from home who can't deliver the same level of ability or level of service to the people. Not their fault necessarily, but at the same time, does that mean they should be given full wages when there are a lot of people across the country who aren't, right? Who are just out of jobs completely, right? it seems tone deaf, continually tone deaf from this government, right? Anyway, back to this. The federal minister responsible for public access to information has advised his cabinet colleagues of the need for transparency and accountability, even in times of crisis. In a letter sent Wednesday to his fellow ministers, Treasury Board President Jean-Yves Decloux said being open during the COVID-19 pandemic is key to ensuring public confidence. The letter obtained by Canadian press stresses the importance of documenting government decision-making, managing sensitive files securely, and making best efforts to answer requests under the Access to Information Act. It also encourages ministers to have their institutions proactively publish as much information as possible about COVID-19 on the federal open government portal as soon as that is feasible. The message from Decloux follows calls from Information Commissioner Carol Maynard? Sorry if I got that wrong. The Canadian Association of Journalists and an ad hoc accountability group for concrete actions to ensure transparency during the pandemic. The Access to Information law allows people who pay a $5 fee to request a wide range of federal files, but the government says the pandemic is hampering its ability to answer formal applications. Earlier this spring, Maynard predicted it could take years to recover from the expected delays caused by COVID-19. Without prompt government action, she spoke with Decloux about her concerns during a May 5th phone call. Many federal employees are working remotely, and those doing non-essential duties have been asked to limit their use of government networks, sometimes making it more difficult for agencies to release information. Well, at what point does your duty become essential when it could take years to catch up from the backlogs? It's either one or the other. Like, it either matters or it doesn't, right? And if it doesn't matter, then why is the bureaucracy in place in the first place? Like, why do we need the layer of gatekeeper, right? $5, thank you for the money. Like, right? And I'm pretty sure you could just do that automatically. I'm sure I could do that automatically with a WordPress install. Like, it's not that hard, as far as I understand it. If you're selling essentially $5 subscriptions, right? Like, I don't know. Windsor Star, this is Canadian business, and I've got this and one more, and then we're done for the day. Windsor Star is reporting local steel company angry after losing Canadian contract to Chinese firm. This is the other day. The owner of a local steel manufacturer, Atlas Tubing, is angry after being left on the sidelines of a $200 million Alberta solar project, which instead signed a deal with a Chinese company. I said to project contractors, "You're doing this at a time when millions are out of work in Canada. You have steel fabricators and mills begging for business. Plus, this is a solar project in Canada for green energy," said Barry Zeckelman. And you still give it to China. I think that's enough. Link is in the description if you want to read it for yourself. And the final article today is from the Financial Post, published May 27th, so a few days ago, and it's an opinion piece, so I'm not going to get into it, but I just think it's worth sharing. Canada's debt load is even worse than you think. Add it all up, and Canada's debt burden is $3.2 trillion. That's 166% of GDP, fully 4 times the IMF forecast for 2020. And I think that there's going to be a lot of Western countries that are in this similar predicament, but this is the amount of spending we're doing with the amount of oversight that is expected versus the oversight that is actually happening is very, very concerning. And it's not just me talking about it. It's a lot of people who are concerned about the debt load, concerned about the spending, concerned about the ability for Canada to weather this fiscal storm. I mean, like, we were already on a $1 billion surplus that the conservative Harper government gave the Trudeau government in 2015. We had squandered a lot of it. We had not started the infrastructure projects, and that's another boondoggle that Pierre Poilievre exposed yesterday. And we don't have the infrastructure spending that Justin Trudeau got elected on in 2015. We're going to build Canada 3 small $10 billion deficits and then back to balance in 2019. Didn't happen. Not going to happen. They didn't have balance in mind. They were on track to double the debt by 2040, right? We were going to be on for $40 billion. But now all that's out the window. They spent $371 billion in March, according to Blacklock's. So Canada's not on firm footing. And that doesn't even include any of the provincial debt, right? Ontario's in debt to the tune of $350 billion. So now there's a lot of potential because we're a rich country, and rich being we have lots of natural resources. We have manpower to mine those resources, and we can sell them on the open market usually. But we're hampered because if you look at Canada as a whole, the oil is landlocked. We can send it to the United States, but we lose money on the transfer. We can't refine the oil, so we're selling bitumen, not refined oil, and that's cheaper. We get, what is it, $12 a barrel or something like that now, when the going rate is 50, right? If it's 50, I don't know what it is now, but if it's 50, we were getting 12. That's the last time I was paying attention because COVID took over, right? But that's one example of natural resources being squandered by bad policies. No pipelines in importing Saudi oil, right? So like we're harming ourselves with bad policies, but the public's demanding these bad policies because they believe something that's false. And it's crazy because you can't explain it to somebody, right? Like you can show them something like Planet of the Humans and say like, look, it's a scam. Like it's just a money scam. It's a straight up theft. And then they still pretend that they have moral superiority because they care about the environment. Well, I'm sure it's not that bad. Well, it's bad. It's worse probably than what Planet of the Humans illustrated. And we're doubling down, tripling down, right? Like I just showed you a steel plant that's a green energy solar plant. The contract went to China. Do you think that works? Like, why are we wasting the money? The guy, the rabid environmentalist in Planet of the Humans said, like, you'd probably be better to just directly burn it as fossil fuels rather than go through the pantomime of making these things, because they have to be manufactured and made every time, and they rely on fossil fuels, right? Without the fossil fuels, you can't manufacture the solar panels or the wind turbines or anything. It's just fact. Like, and again, those don't seem to matter, right? So here we are. If you're protesting against certain things, no problem. Then if you're not there, then who else is? But if you're protesting to get your business back, then you are putting people in danger and they're worried about you, right? What they're doing is putting their lives in jeopardy. And that's what I'm concerned with. It's for you, dear citizen. Right? Man, it's so frustrating. Okay, thanks for watching, everybody. Check out CanadaPoly.com. Check out CanadaReport.co. Check out SpeakingMoistly.co. I haven't recorded anything new. Not yet. Tuesday, probably. Tuesday with Greg is scheduled, so we'll talk to you guys then, and maybe him and I will talk about some of these things. Have a wonderful, wonderful day.